Hi everyone, welcome to an exciting supernatural fantasy loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I previously talked with an artist by the name of Will Perkins, and on this episode, I am delighted to be talking with another half of that collaborative team, Eric Grissom. Eric, thank you for jumping in, joining, and bringing Nosferatu with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Yes, my Nosferatu behind me. I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to the film. I don't know if you've seen
I
the Eggers
am.
trailer. Yes, it
Yeah.
looks very good.
Yeah. I have no doubt that he'll take it to some new ground and the cast looks great. Yeah. I'm in line for
Yeah,
that for
I'm very
sure.
excited. Like I like his films anyway. I love The Lighthouse and so when I saw that he was doing that, I got very excited. And then like it took forever for the trailer to come out, and then I
Hmm.
finally saw it. Um, what did I see it? Right before I saw the new Alien movie and they played it in the theater and it was very exciting. So
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. You and I think, share that this love of supernatural and fantasy and kind of mystical storytelling. And I know that folks out there will know you for Goblins as well as you mentioned that you are a podcaster as well.
yeah, for the comic side of things, I've been making comics and graphic novels for wow, at this point well over a decade, which is hard to imagine that that's true. But yes, I did Goblin, which is a fantasy adventure graphic novel with Will Perkins, who you've talked
Hmm.
to for
Hmm.
Dark Horse. We've done two volumes of that. I did a choose your own adventure style book in that same realm that I self-published that came out last year, and I did a tabletop role-playing game that's free that people can download for Goblin. Before that, I did another book with Will Perkins. I don't know if you guys got into it. It was called Gregory's Suicide. It was kind of like a
Hmm.
spy sci-fi thing that was through Dark Horse. Previous to that, I did a lot of self-publishing. So that's sort of that had been sort of my favorite thing to do, just sort of you don't have to be told whether or not, you don't have to be given permission to tell a comic. There's all these tools and ways to put stuff out. So I was
Hmm.
definitely more in the DIY school of putting the books out. You mentioned the podcast too. Me and a friend of mine, Dan Johnson, for over 10 years, have done a classic Doctor Who podcast where we reviewed every available classic Doctor Who streaming show, as well as I think we just did the new season. So that's a whole other box. Have you watched the Doctor Who show at all?
I
It's a
have not seen the
very
new season.
niche.
I haven't.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
It's a very niche market. It's interesting because we're both Americans. It's certainly big here, but it's much bigger in UK. So most of our listeners are actually in the UK and in Australia. And recently I did a podcast with this radio podcast thing, Trap One. And it was me and a bunch of folks from the UK. And it was just fascinating to hear childhood experiences. Like they were mentioning things I had no idea what they were talking about. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. And uh that with this connection to comics, fantasy, storytelling, how
Mhm.
did you get down this winding path of mini stories?
I've always gravitated towards making my own worlds since some of my earliest memories. When my mom worked at AT&T, she was a single mother. It was my mom, my sister, and I, and she would bring home office supplies from AT&T, and T, and they had these hardback books that were lined, fill with blank. I think they were ledgers probably.
Hmm.
And she
Hmm.
would, quote unquote, borrow them from the supply desk. She hasn't worked there in years. I think the statute of limitations is up. So I would just fill those things up with characters and backstories, and I would make maps of the planets. And then I took it as far as having like a whole solar system, and this one has a blue sun, and that's why that's and like just filled those books. So I was probably 6 or 7. And since then, it's just been making games or writing stories. My love of comics is probably can be traced back to around the same time. I'm
Hmm.
going to be 50 this year. So when I was young, comics were still very much a part of like the shopping experience. So if you went to a supermarket, there was going to be comics there. Certainly spinner racks that they would put in convenience stores and other locations that you just don't get anymore today.
Mhm.
So as soon as I saw like a comic book, the one that I always talk about when people ask is Detective Comics 526. It was a Batman comic book. I loved the 66 Adam West show.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so seeing that comic book, and it was about Batman fighting all of his enemies. And so there's this great double page spread, and it shows all of the people that he fights and like the weirdest people that you were like, who is Catman? Like, what is this? And just this breadth of characters that I just completely fell in love with. So yeah, so I was hooked fairly young. I was so into comic books. I remember I had did like some kind of presentation that I ended up having to do it for like the entire school. It was like they picked some kid from every grade. And so in fourth grade, I was just extremely nervous and I was in front of the school talking about how you should bag and board all of your comic books and it was also at that point was like the height of the speculator market, that
Uh-huh.
big
Uh-huh.
comic boom before it all fell apart and they, completely ruined that whole thing. But it was fun. Yeah, so it's always been something I love. I love pictures and words together. That medium I just find to be perfect for storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, as a longtime purveyor and creator of stories, what are the ingredients of a good story in your opinion?
I think it varies. I think the most important piece is that there should be some transformation that takes place. Certainly, not necessarily with the characters, but with the reader. Like if it's a good
Hmm.
story, I will be a different person from the moment I started reading it till after. Like it should affect some kind of change.
Hmm.
It doesn't necessarily every character doesn't have an arc. You can watch certain things like I watched the Andy Warhol documentary. It was like they took Andy Warhol's diaries and they had an AI voice reading as Andy Warhol, and it was really fascinating. And they spent a lot of time talking about his portrait series where he would just leave the camera on a person's face for an extended period of time. Now, there's no story there, but I found those pieces so fascinating, and you can find a story there. And I feel like you can connect in some way that it's almost like a metaphor. Like, so there's this metaphor that this artist, you have something within you that I'm trying to get from me to you. And
Hmm.
whatever
Hmm.
that vehicle is, whether it's a comic book or a graphic novel, or in this case, sort of like a moving painting in the Warhol case, if it connects to me, that's a great story.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to check every box, with it has to have an inciting incident at this point, and there has to be, all that stuff helps and structure is great. But if there's like an internal change within the viewer, the reader, whoever, I feel like that's a successful story.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, comics is also this collaborative medium, so I'm curious about what it's been like to work with Will on the projects that you've worked on, including Goblin.
Yeah, it's been great. So Will and I have been working together now for a long time too. Even before Goblin, even before Gregory's suicide that I mentioned, I had done an all ages book with an artist, David Halverson, called Planet Gigantic. And the conceit was it was sort of structured like the old 70s and 60s sort of comic books where you would have like a main story, 20-page story, and then
Hmm.
a backup story that was something else within the world, or you'd introduce a new character. So I would have the main 20-page stories I would do with David, and the backups I would find different artists and work with. And that's how I first ended up working with Will. We did that together, and we have similar interests and things, and he's a really nice guy. We work well together. So I feel like, once we found each other on that thing, we were like, okay, let's try something a little bit different. And we probably did a couple of shorts together before we ended up doing Gregory Suicide at Dark Horse. But comics is a small community where you will sort of run into people multiple times. And if you work with someone in one project, you may not work with them again immediately, but 3 or 4 years down the line, you may run into them again.
Hmm.
But like any kind of small community, it's in like when you find something that works, you sort of don't want to let go of it, or you want to, sort of see that all the way through.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was the case with him. It was like if you can find someone that you can work with project to project where you can have a shorthand, I don't have to spend as much time sort of saying, he knows what I like, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and I know what he likes to draw. So a lot of that stuff just comes with time and, mutual respect and everything.
Yeah, yeah, really interesting. And uh, like what you said there about sort of recurring people in your life
Mhm.
creatively too.
Yeah, and I've been lucky in that way that I've worked with, I tend to work with the same people on multiple projects, and that's happened a few times. And I've been lucky as a writer, so I do, even though I drew at one point as a kid, certainly, and I had a web comic at one point in the '90s. Not a great artist, but I've been gifted in the uh, collaborators that I've had, where I've had people like Will or Phil Sloan, who I did Dead Horse with, or Claire Connolly, that I did Animals with. I mentioned David Halverson, all fantastic artists, all uniquely different artists. So that's been a gift.
Nice, nice, yeah. Um, as a writer, any particular rituals, any creative process ingredients for you, writing in particular places or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, particular places, I usually always write in the morning at my desk in the, Monday through Friday. I have 3 kids. I have a normal job outside of comics. So I try to find the time to do it. And I feel like if it's always at the same time, and if I can find that window, even if I
Hmm.
don't want to write, which happens more often than you'd think, I make sure I'm there to do it. So for me, it's like Monday through Friday, I take my daughter to school, and then I have some time before I start the workday. If I'm struggling or if I'm looking for sort of some inspiration, I do like to go out in the woods and walk the dogs, or just get out somewhere more natural
Hmm.
among trees. I find to be the very inspiring. So I'll do that as well, and then either do audio recordings into like a phone app if I just sort of free form thinking about ideas, and so I've gotten certainly a lot of stuff that way.
Nice, nice, yeah. Well, I think I have one more official question that's on the
Sure.
list, and we can hit anything that we might have missed in the talk through. And that question, I always like to ask where people can find out more so that if someone's interest is piqued and they want to check out Goblin or Gregory Suicide or anything else that you've worked on the tabletop game, where might they go?
The best place is just my name. So ericgrissom.com. All of my books are there. All of the links to everything is there. And on that website, you can sign up for my newsletter. So I don't send it out. I used to send it out every week. I don't do that anymore. Now it's sort of, I'll put one out whenever I have something to say, or I'm feeling the need. It's more like a diary.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
it get pretty personal. If you want to know all of the ups and downs of a writing career or trying to make it in comics, I'll tell you as much about my failures as successes. So it's it's a more intimate experience, I think, than something you'll see me posting on social media or whatever. But that is the best place if you want to know like what's coming out. I give away some free comics there. Like you mentioned, the game is free. Like, so there's stuff that you can get. All the links are there and everything as well. Most of the
Cool.
books, like the Goblin that just came out, you should be able to find that at your bookstore, but certainly places like Amazon and online retailers. Some of the stuff that's like self-published, you got to go to my site to get it.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Well, any words about what's next and anything that we've missed that you'd like to mention?
No, I think you've covered everything. Again, the new book just came out. I'm working on a sequel that we hope we'll be able to, go to print with as well. I have a couple of new projects, nothing I can actually mention at this point. Yeah, if you like Doctor Who, Dan and I have been doing that forever. It is a train wreck in the best way. So I would recommend that you check that out. It's on YouTube and, wherever podcasts are.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Eric, thank you for the time. Thank you for the creative pursuits and energy, even at those times that you don't feel like writing, which I can believe in the midst of all the life things. And glad to have you
Yeah.
back anytime.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great. It's nice chatting with
Absolutely.
you.
Nice to chat with you. Thanks.